Hey guys, it's Jack from Historical Archery, and this is a yew French longbow. This bow is made by Longbow Belgique from Belgium, from Wallonia, near the border of France and Belgium. And I finished it by sanding, doing the finishing touches, and staining it. But it's obviously the tailoring work is mostly done by Longbow Belgique. He has a store on Etsy if you're interested, and here is his French war bow. This bow, we based it on the historical sources from the French Longbowmen. So there's lots of videos on English longbows, but French longbows and French longbowmen did exist in history. Franc Archers, for example, were a unit specifically created by the king. And they were, of course, similar to the English, of the lower classes. The French also liked the idea of training relatively inexpensive troops that can do some damage, especially to unarmored or cavalry or light armor. Cheap troops, you pay them cheap, and with cheap equipment, relatively speaking to men-at-arms with full armor, and they can do some damage on the battlefield. So of course the French king liked that idea, and they created some. Of course, not as extensively as the English. The English were famous for it, and they were also mercenaries that were employed all over, like by the Burgundians, by the French as well. There were English longbowmen used by the French as mercenaries. So in fact, they were mercenaries in other places of Europe as well. But the French weren't as famous for being longbowmen. We know the French mostly used crossbows, and in fact, most of the crossbows from medieval Europe were actually made of wood or composite materials, but the French did employ longbowmen. And according to our research, the longbows were similar to the English, but there are some key differences. The one thing is, of course, the French would have used more French yew compared to the English using yew that are imported all over. The French had quite a lot of yew in their region that the English doesn't have easy access to. So that's why the English have to import their yew. They sometimes import it in the Baltic, they import it from Italy, they also import it from Spain in high altitudes, because they can't really import French yew easily. On the northern parts of France was partially occupied by the English, so during some periods of time they could have imported yew from the northern parts of France, but most of the yew were imported elsewhere because they're literally fighting a war in France, so it's difficult for them to just import it. The French wouldn't be happy to trade with them, so it makes more sense to import in other countries like the Baltic. But the French, well, they had their yew locally, so they most likely would have used local yew. And then they also had other woods that the French could have used as well. Ash, for example, or elm. You can all make longbows out of these. You don't have to use yew, so keep that in mind. And another difference, well, according to our research, some of the French longbows don't even have horn nocks. If it's light enough, you don't really need horn nocks. But I think the English would have also done the same on the lighter bows. Sometimes you don't even need the horn nocks, but on the heavier bows, that's when you really start needing the horn nocks. But this one does have horn nocks. And another thing is the French yew quality might not be as good as the English, generally speaking. It's difficult to speculate that today about how good quality the longbows were, because a lot of this is lost in history. If we look at a French manuscript of French archers during the medieval period, it seems that they had a very deep understanding of how to make longbows and the shooting techniques. But when it comes to in practice, it's difficult to say how much did they follow the things by the book. So we have to keep that in mind. So based on the cost of the French longbow versus the English longbow, at least in this specific comparison, the French longbow is a little bit cheaper than the English longbow, or the French arrows are more expensive than the longbow, relatively speaking, because we're using the arrows as a comparison. But it's difficult to say because there's other factors like conversion factors, market value. So with these conversion factors, it's difficult to say, but it would make sense that the French longbows were inferior to the English. For one thing, they were not as famous as the English, but also they were less used. There's less of a longbow culture in France. But it doesn't mean their longbowmen were crap. They had some reasonable longbowmen. Ironically, the 100 Years' War, at least symbolically, was ended by a French longbowman with an axe. He killed the general, with an axe. So it's kind of ironic that it's a symbolic battle. I mean, it was in the end where they killed the general. I guess you can say it's just a nice story that to end the 100 Years' War, a French longbowman killed the general with an axe. It's kind of funny to end the 100 Years' War that way, but it does show that, you know, it's not like a set in stone. The English use longbows, French use crossbows. You know, there's quite a mix and match in there, so just keep that in mind. So anyways, we're going to be shooting this one. This is not a perfect piece of yew, so I think it's going to represent better a lower class longbowman from France, because you can see the yew is actually kind of twisted. When it was tillered, it was cut in the sense that it liked to naturally twist this way. So when it was tillered, the yew became like this. It naturally bent in this dimension. So it's not a perfect split of the sapwood with the heartwood. It's kind of twisted, and that's how this piece of stave was naturally twisted that way. So keep that in mind. It's not a perfect piece of yew, and it's also quite knotty. There's a lot of knots in here. It's really not a perfect stave. Is it still filming? Mm-hmm. You can see the stave's not perfectly perfect. There's a lot of knots. It's not a good piece of yew, but it's a functional piece of yew, and I think that's the important thing. A lot of these are just you know, for a relatively cheap army, because the French relied on heavy cavalry for their actual forces. So this is more their, you know, cheap troops to just fill the gaps. So it's nice that, so I kind of represented it that way by picking not a good quality piece of yew. Good quality pieces of yew most likely would have been sent to the higher classes. So keep that in mind. There's no evidence of shelves or even leather, but mine has a piece of leather glued on because I don't want the yew scratched. And it's quite intuitive to do that. They might have done it. So let's shoot this French longbow, 87 pounds at 27 inches. So I'm not going to pull further than 27 inches because that's what it was tillered to. Oh yeah, look at that target. And it's a pretty heavy arrow. It's about 1,000 grain. So it doesn't shoot fast, but it's a heavy arrow. At 27 inches, you can start feeling the weight, but after 27 inches, I wouldn't want to pull further, just because it wasn't tillered further to 27. Well, you can hear the thump on these 1,000 grain arrows. That's actually over 1,000 grain. I love it. See the target? Done. Oh, I love this thing. It's got a punch. 80 pounds shooting a 1,000 something grain. The arrow's a little heavy for it, so it doesn't shoot fast, but that thump, you can feel it. I think the arrow shafts are a little stiff. You can see the target moving, eh? Getting hit by that, you can feel that thump. It's nice bow. I love this war bow. 80 something pounds for the French. Yeah, it is a war bow weight. It doesn't have to be over 100 pounds. Remember, these are relatively inexpensive troops, and they were employed by the peasantry of France, and it doesn't mean everybody shot above 100 pounds, especially if you don't have a longbow culture. So perhaps they pulled a little bit less than the English, but you know, above 50 pounds, of course, it depends. But with this technique, I think any recruit should be able to pull over 50 pounds, but it's difficult to say what was the average straw weight of the longbowmen compared to the English. These are kind of things that we just have to speculate, and I'll leave it to the historians to debate that.